Imagine this. What if the gods we've always been told to worship aren't the only ones who ever existed? What if powerful black gods once ruled the world, shaping civilizations and guiding humanity before the rise of Yahweh? Stay with me as we uncover this hidden truth, one that has been suppressed for centuries. Today we'll explore the ancient black gods who reigned over vast civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Africa long before Yahweh emerged as the central figure of religious thought. These gods weren't just mythological, they were real, powerful beings whose legacy has been erased from history. Let's dive into this forbidden truth. Let's unravel the spiritual, cultural, and historical significance of these black gods, examine their erasure, and explore the deeper implications of why their existence was hidden. Get ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about divine history as we shed light on the gods that were forgotten. 1. The Black Gods and Ancient Civilizations. God stands in the divine assembly. He gives judgment among the gods. Psalm 82, 1-2. In the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Africa, numerous deities were worshipped, many of whom were depicted with African features. These gods weren't simply myths. They were revered as powerful beings who had dominion over creation, wisdom, and cosmic order. Civilizations such as the Egyptians, Sumerians, and the indigenous African cultures all recognized a pantheon of divine rulers. Gods who imparted knowledge, taught agriculture, and helped guide the spiritual lives of their people. Gods like Isis, Osiris, Anubis, and the powerful Orishas in West Africa shaped the cultures they ruled with wisdom that governed everything from life and death to the cycles of nature. These gods were deeply intertwined with the land they ruled and became symbols of a harmonious connection between the physical world and the divine. These gods were not just divine figures, but embodiments of wisdom and balance, symbolizing the unity between nature and the spirit. Their existence challenges today's notion of a singular monotheistic deity, as they represented a divine plurality that permeated the entire universe. They were more than deities. They were the living force behind life's cycles, a reflection of the interconnectedness of all creation. Psalm 82 hints at this plural existence of gods, showing that God himself once engaged in dialogue with multiple divine beings. In essence, these deities ruled not as isolated figures, but as a collective governing force that balanced nature and humanity. Their existence as divine entities within the world invites us to reconsider the limited monotheistic narrative that many have accepted today. Just as these ancient gods represented the interconnectedness of all things, we too are called to see the divine in all aspects of life, understanding that the divine is not confined to one form or one narrative. In today's world, we may encounter the divine in many different ways, across cultures, philosophies, and spiritual paths. By broadening our spiritual perspective, we honor the fullness of God's manifestation, remembering that His wisdom is not exclusive, but expansive. 2. The erasure of the black gods. You shall not bow down to their gods or serve them, nor do as they do. Exodus 23:24. As Yahweh's influence grew, so did the systematic campaign to suppress and erase the ancient gods that had once been revered. The process was not subtle. Many of the black gods, once worshipped for their wisdom and power, were demonized, cast aside, and forgotten in favor of a singular deity. The great gods of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Africa were either transformed into malevolent figures or completely erased from collective memory. This eradication wasn't just a religious shift. It was a deliberate strategy to consolidate power and control over the spiritual narratives of entire cultures. The ancient gods, once respected and adored, were written out of history. The worship of the Neteru in Egypt, the Orishas in West Africa, and the Anunnaki in Mesopotamia was silenced by a broader agenda to establish Yahweh as the sole deity. This wasn't simply about religious beliefs. It was about erasing a history that challenged the singular authority of one God. In order to secure Yahweh's dominance, those who came before him had to be eliminated, or at least rebranded as demons and false idols. What made these gods so threatening? It wasn't just their power. but the fact that they represented spiritual autonomy and a pluralistic understanding of the divine. These gods were not just figures of worship, they were deeply integrated into the fabric of life, guiding societies with wisdom that transcended the religious institutions of the time. In order for a new singular god to rise, these diverse deities had to be erased, their names silenced, and their worship outlawed. As we reflect on the erasure of these black gods, we are reminded of how easily dominant systems can shape beliefs. The powers that be in ancient times manipulated religious and cultural narratives to suppress diversity and consolidate control. The same forces that erased these gods continue to shape our understanding of spirituality today. But just as these gods were erased, their stories never truly disappeared. Instead, they were suppressed, hidden in forgotten texts, overlooked in archaeological discoveries, and ignored in the pages of history. The remnants of their influence linger in the world, offering us a deeper understanding of who we are spiritually. Reflecting on the erasure of these ancient deities invites us to question the ways in which our own faiths might be shaped by historical power dynamics. It's essential to reclaim a more holistic spiritual identity that honors the breadth of human experience and acknowledges the legacy of deities that were once revered but silenced. 3. Black gods in the Bible, the Elohim and the divine assembly. I said, "You are gods. You are all sons of the Most High." Psalm 82:6. Throughout the Old Testament, we encounter references to divine beings, gods, and celestial assemblies that challenge the dominant monotheistic narrative. One of the most intriguing examples is the term Elohim, which in its original Hebrew form is plural, meaning gods. Despite this, translations over the centuries have often softened its meaning, presenting Elohim as a singular entity, Yahweh, at the forefront of the biblical story. But why did early texts acknowledge the plural nature of divinity? In Psalm 82, we find a powerful moment where God himself convenes a divine assembly, standing among the gods and judging them for their failure to act justly. The verse reads, "God stands in the divine assembly. He gives judgment among the gods." This scene paints a vivid picture of a time when the divine world was seen as plural, populated by a council of gods, and Yahweh was not the solitary figure he is often portrayed as today. This passage calls into question the traditional understanding of Yahweh as the one and only God. If Yahweh was merely one among many gods in a divine assembly, what does that say about the theological foundations of our faith? The Bible itself contains subtle clues that reveal a more complex and pluralistic divine reality where different gods held dominion over different aspects of creation. As we explore these ancient understandings, we can begin to see how the consolidation of religious authority, first through the establishment of Yahweh and later through the rise of monotheism, demanded the erasure of these other divine figures. By removing them from the narrative, the power structures that supported the idea of a singular controlling deity became more entrenched. The spiritual significance here is profound. It invites us to reflect on the history of our own faith and ask questions about how we understand God. Is God truly only one, or have we misunderstood the plurality that existed in ancient spiritual frameworks? By recognizing the plurality of divine beings in biblical texts, we are challenged to see God's action in a broader context, acknowledging the diversity of divine expressions and honoring them as reflections of the Creator's vastness. In our spiritual lives today, embracing the plural nature of the divine can expand our understanding and deepen our relationship with God. It reminds us that the divine cannot be confined to one narrative, one face, or one understanding. Instead, we are invited to open our hearts to the fullness of God's presence, which has always been present in many forms, calling us to a deeper and more inclusive spiritual experience. 4. Ancient African deities and their spiritual influence. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Genesis 2:7. In ancient African traditions, spiritual beliefs were intricately tied to the earth, the cosmos, and the rhythm of life itself. From Egypt to West Africa, from the Congo to Ethiopia, there existed a deep connection between gods and humans, gods who were not distant or removed but directly involved in the lives of the people. These deities were seen as both rulers and guides, teaching humanity about agriculture, governance, and the balance of the physical and spiritual worlds. Take, for example, the African gods like Shango, Obatala, and Osiris. Shango, known as the god of thunder, was a force of both destruction and protection. Obatala, the deity of wisdom and purity, embodied clarity and spiritual truth. And Osiris, revered in Egypt, was the god of life after death, guiding souls through the journey of resurrection. These gods were often depicted with African features, dark skin, broad noses, and natural hair, and they held dominion over every facet of life. Historically, these deities were much more than figures of myth. They were considered the architects of civilization itself. Osiris taught the Egyptians about agriculture, giving them the tools to transform barren land into fertile ground. Shango guided the Yoruba people in matters of justice and leadership. Obatala provided wisdom to all who sought it. They were not abstract beings. They were intimately connected to the day-to-day struggles and triumphs of their people. The spiritual significance of these deities is vast. They represented not only power and authority, but also the balance of life and death, the harmony between the seen and unseen, the respect for nature and the cosmos. They embodied the unity of the divine and the human, showing that spirituality was not confined to temples or distant realms, but was woven into every moment of life. The relationship between these gods and their people was symbiotic. They shaped the world, and in return, the people honored and respected them. As we look to these ancient deities today, we can draw lessons about the connection between the spiritual and the earthly. These deities did not separate the sacred from the mundane. Everything, nature, body, spirit, was a reflection of the divine. As we reflect on their influence, we can learn to honor the earth, our bodies, and the world around us as expressions of God's creation. Just as these gods were connected to the earth and the cosmos, we too are called to recognize the divine in every part of life. In our modern world, where spirituality can sometimes feel disconnected from the physical world, these ancient traditions remind us that true spirituality honors the interconnectedness of all things. Whether through the rhythms of the drum, the dance of the ancestors, or the cycles of nature, we are invited to reconnect with the fullness of our spiritual heritage and embrace the sacred in every aspect of our lives. 5. The rewriting of sacred texts and the demonization of black gods. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Deuteronomy 32:8. The rise of Yahweh as the central deity in monotheistic faiths did not occur in a vacuum. Throughout ancient texts and traditions, there were multiple gods revered by diverse peoples across the world. These gods were not mere figures of folklore. They were powerful beings with immense influence over creation, wisdom, and the law of nature. But as monotheism solidified, particularly with the spread of Yahweh's worship, a deliberate effort was made to suppress, demonize, or completely erase these ancient gods. One of the most profound examples of this is the rewriting of sacred texts, especially those found in the apocryphal writings and ancient scriptures, like the Book of Enoch. These texts, which offered a broader view of divine beings, were marginalized, rejected, and often excluded from the canon. In the Book of Enoch, we find descriptions of the Watchers, beings who descended from the heavens to share divine knowledge with humanity. These beings were not evil. They brought knowledge, wisdom, and guidance to humankind. Yet, over time, these gods were reinterpreted as fallen angels, deemed dangerous, and cast as rebels against God's singular authority. The historical context reveals that this shift was part of a larger power struggle. As Yahweh's influence grew, especially through the unification of Israel and the rise of empires like Babylon and Rome, rival deities were seen as a threat to centralized control. to establish Yahweh as the one true God. The divine assembly, composed of these other gods, had to be rewritten. Those gods were not merely ignored, but they were demonized. Ancient beings like the Egyptian Netaru, the Sumerian gods, and the African Orishas were cast in negative roles, erased from the history of creation, or turned into false gods or idols. This process was not accidental, it was systematic. These gods, revered by generations of people, were systematically removed from collective memory to make way for a singular narrative of Yahweh's exclusive supremacy. This manipulation of sacred texts, along with the demonization of spiritual figures, was a method of consolidating spiritual and political power. The message was clear. All previous forms of spirituality were either inferior or dangerous. Spiritual significance lies in understanding how such alterations affect not only history, but also our modern faith. The legacy of the black gods, often erased or demonized, is a reflection of how power has been exerted over faith systems through time. When we confront these rewritings, we open the door to a more honest understanding of our spiritual heritage. The suppression of these deities was not a simple rejection of ancient myths. It was an attempt to control the narrative of who God is and how God should be worshipped. For us, the modern faithful, it's important to consider how our own faith might have been shaped by these power dynamics. What parts of our spiritual understanding have been influenced by a history of control rather than truth? As we reclaim the knowledge of these erased deities, we begin to break free from systems that have long tried to suppress spiritual diversity and authenticity. This exploration calls us to recognize that our spiritual identity may be more complex than we were led to believe. Reconnecting with the truth of these black gods is not just about recovering history. It is about liberating our faith from the constraints of a one-sided narrative and stepping into a more holistic, inclusive understanding of the divine. 6. The legacy of black gods and spiritual reawakening. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. Romans 8:19. The legacy of the black gods is not confined to ancient history. It continues to influence spiritual movements today, particularly within Afrocentric traditions that are reclaiming their roots. Across the world, there has been a resurgence of interest in the gods, deities, and spiritual practices that were once suppressed and erased. This spiritual awakening is about more than recovering forgotten history. It's about reconnecting with the divine lineage that has been hidden, distorted, or silenced. Ancient African deities, such as the Orishas, the Netaru, and the gods of Sumer, were not merely abstract concepts. They were seen as powerful, active forces that shaped the very fabric of life. These gods were deeply connected to humanity's survival and well-being. They taught agriculture, governance, healing, and wisdom. They were not distant, far-off beings, but part of the daily spiritual life, living alongside their people, guiding them in their struggles and triumphs. In recent years, a new generation is rediscovering these ancient gods. Spiritual movements rooted in African traditions, such as Vodou, Santeria, and Yoruba, as well as contemporary Afrocentric spirituality, have brought the gods back into focus. These movements don't just honor the gods, they acknowledge the deep wisdom and strength these deities offered to their people. Whether it is through ritual, music, dance, or communal practices, there is a renewed sense of connection with the divine that is both empowering and liberating. This spiritual awakening isn't just about reclaiming old beliefs. It's about restoring an identity that was stolen. By reconnecting with these gods, modern followers are reconnecting with the divine spark that has always existed within them. It's a journey that allows people to embrace their true selves and understand that they come from a line of spiritual royalty, beings who once ruled over vast lands with wisdom and justice, beings who shaped civilization. The spiritual significance of this awakening lies in the realization that we are not defined by the suppression of our history or the erasure of our gods. We are defined by our connection to the divine, and that connection is rooted in our heritage, our ancestors, and the gods who walked before us. This reawakening is not just about the recovery of ancient beliefs. It is about the restoration of dignity, strength, and purpose for people who were made to feel inferior by religious and political systems designed to erase their divine heritage. For many, this awakening brings with it a sense of spiritual fulfillment, a deeper understanding of self, and a renewed sense of purpose. As you walk this path of reawakening, you begin to see the divine not just in distant, abstract concepts, but in the everyday moments of life. You begin to understand that the gods you once thought were lost to history are alive in you, alive in your prayers, your dance, your music, and your connection with the earth and the cosmos. The application to our modern lives is clear. We are all called to reclaim our spiritual heritage. Whether you're of African descent or not, understanding and honoring the diverse ways the divine has manifested throughout history allows us to appreciate the richness of God's creation. This journey of spiritual reawakening is not about replacing one set of beliefs with another. It is about expanding our vision of the divine, embracing the fullness of our spiritual lineage, and reconnecting with the ancient wisdom that is still available to us today. By embracing the gods of the past, we honor them not just in ritual, but in how we live our lives, how we treat the earth, how we honor each other, and how we live in alignment with the divine principles that have always been present. This is not just a historical journey. It is a spiritual renewal that transforms our present and guides us toward a more just, inclusive, and spiritually enriched future. Conclusion. Today we uncovered a forbidden truth. The existence of black gods who ruled the world long before the rise of Yahweh as the singular divine figure. These gods were not mere symbols or myths, but real, powerful beings who shaped civilizations, guided nations, and imparted wisdom that still resonates today. Their erasure wasn't just a historical accident. It was a deliberate spiritual and political act to centralize control under a singular deity. But despite the centuries of suppression, their legacy lives on. As we reflect on this journey, we recognize that spirituality has always been diverse, rich, and multifaceted. The stories of the black gods offer us a glimpse into a time when the divine wasn't confined to a single narrative, but was expressed in a multitude of forms across different cultures. Their erasure was a painful loss, but their reawakening offers a powerful opportunity for us to reconnect with our own spiritual roots. In embracing these ancient truths, we are not only rediscovering a rich spiritual heritage, but also challenging the narratives that have limited our understanding of God. This is a call to expand our vision of the divine, to honor the fullness of God's creation, and to reclaim the spiritual power that has been hidden for too long. What do you think about the black gods who were erased from history? How has this new perspective on spirituality, identity, and divine power affected your understanding of faith? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have an open, honest conversation about how we can reclaim our spiritual truths and awaken to the divine presence that has always been with us. If this video has shifted your perspective and inspired you to explore deeper, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on future content that explores these transformative revelations.